Welcome to Emotional Organization, the podcast where personal growth meets business strategy. I'm your host, Dr. Denaige and if you're here, you've probably been looking for a new way to approach your life and leadership, one that's grounded in practical, actionable advice and a deeper understanding of your emotions. Now, I'm not your therapist, but what I am is someone with decades of experience in business, leadership, and navigating some pretty tough personal challenges. Through this podcast, I want to help you get your business brain and emotional self in sync so that you can lead yourself and others with confidence, clarity, and purpose. Hey there, welcome back to Emotional Organization. I'm your host, Dr. Denaige McDonnell. If you've been listening for a while, you already know this show has been a space to explore emotions, leadership, and the messiness of being human both at work and in life. But today's episode, and the next one that follows, are going to mark a turning point. This is the first in a two-part transition series that's going to bridge between what emotional organization has been and what's coming next, a new project called The Good Think. Now, I'm not leaving this show behind. In fact, I'm evolving it, and I want to take you with me. So before we step into that next chapter, I wanted to take a few opportunities to look backwards to the year I learned how to listen to myself. When I started emotional organization, I didn't know what I was doing. And I don't say that to sound humble or cute. I actually mean I really didn't know what I was doing, not with the podcast and not with my life. I had just finished my PhD, which meant that my head was full of other people's words. It was full of research and articles, interviews, transcripts, policy papers, and all of it was bouncing around in my head like static. And I'd taken in so much information, I'd made so much new connections with this knowledge that it felt like my brain was just expanding inside my skull and really about to explode. And the research wasn't light reading either. It was about workplace health and safety, politics, and topics like harassment, equity, and leadership. All the stuff that really does make you question your own behavior, the things you've tolerated, the things you've ignored, the things you've maybe even encouraged without realizing it. It's the kind of material that forces you to think about bigger things, topics like ethics and humanity, and where we draw the line between them. When I started, I thought that I'd find a few problems that I could fix, maybe a few gaps in leadership or policy that needed a better structure or maybe a better explanation. But what I found was really that the foundation has got a lot of rot. And as a person who's actively doing renovations on a 200-year-old home, I can tell you that rot in the foundation is what you need to tend to first. Now, people in positions of power protecting themselves instead of the people they were supposed to protect, I saw that and I didn't like it. And what I noticed was that good people were making bad choices out of fear. And bad people were calling themselves good just because they'd said the right words in a meeting or towards the media. And I remember sitting one day kind of surrounded by the leftover remnants of my dissertation, of transcripts and quotes and paperwork, and just sort of feeling a combination of, I guess, disgust and heartbreak at the same time. And it sat really heavy with me. And it was a moment where what I was thinking, which was this is a them problem, became a realization that this is a we problem. And that realization stuck because once you see clearly, you can't unsee it. And so I made a deal with myself that even if I couldn't fix the system yet, because really I'm still optimistic, maybe I could at least start talking about it honestly, without all the corporate polish, without the academic filter. Just really the truth of what I'd seen, what I'd felt, and what I couldn't stop thinking about. And that's where this podcast came from. It wasn't a place of confidence. It was really a place of disillusionment, mixed with just enough hope that maybe talking about it would help it make sense. The first time I hit the record button, I was here in our Liverpool house, with my mic propped up on a stack of academic textbooks, my dog still snoring just a few feet away from me, and the bells of the church interrupting my recording session at every opportunity. But I was taking hours to do a recording of an episode, so that's kind of fair. But I remember thinking, okay, let's just see what happens with this. I'd never done a podcast before. I didn't know anything really about it. But that approach has been kind of a motto for a lot of things in my life. Start now, figure it out later. And so I didn't have a big brand plan or an editorial calendar. What I had was a lot of unfinished sentences in my head, what one of my friends calls thought fragments. And so I had those thought fragments all kind of rattling about, and there was an increasing need to say them out loud. And so at first I was treating this like a lecture. I was approaching the podcast with notes and citations, underlying theory, bullet points. I really wanted to earn my own approval on academic rigor. But 15 concepts in 40 minutes delivered straight from a research vault, well, it was dense. And sure, maybe it was academically smart, but I think it was kind of boring and too much. And I could hear that as soon as I started listening back. It sounded like someone reading a manual about emotions instead of someone who actually had them. And that's when I understood that people really don't need more of the theory. They need more of the truth. Now, of course, truth is really a constructed reality, but having someone who's willing to talk about what happens in between the theories, that messy middle where we actually live, I think is super important. And so over time, I scrapped the outline and I started telling that version instead. And it wasn't a polished version, but it was this is what I saw, this is what I felt, and here's what I still don't know what to do with version. And so I kind of went along with that for a little while. And what I discovered through that process was that editing yourself is its own kind of therapy. You sit there wearing headphones for hours, listening to your own voice, saying things that you didn't even realize you believed until you heard them back. You start catching your habits, like filler words, nervous laughter, the part of your voice that tightens when you're not being fully truthful or when you're saying the words of someone else. There's nowhere to hide, and that is the gift of it. Every time I cut a line that sounded forced, I actually got a little bit closer to what was real for me. Every time I left a pause where the truth needed just a couple seconds to land and kind of breathe in your mind, I learned to trust silence. And so I think that this practice of the podcast has been how I've come to find my actual voice. And it wasn't the one that I thought I needed to have for credibility, but the one that already existed underneath all of the academic padding I'd put around it. So the hardest part of the podcast wasn't the time it took to do it, or even the technology I had to learn in order to do it. It was the question that showed up every week when I sat down to edit. And that was, is this worth 40 minutes of someone's time? And I asked that question because time feels really sacred to me now. It's always felt special. It's always been important. But as I get older, as I have a better understanding and a greater appreciation for how easy it is for us to spend our time ineffectively, I'm realizing that this is really the one resource that I can't replenish. I can't get a refund on my time. And so I've started to kind of measure everything against that. Does this story deserve your time? Does its preparation deserve mine? And if not, what would make it worth it? And honestly, you guys, some weeks I didn't have a good answer. I'd be staring back at the waveform from the podcast, kind of listening to the same line over and over again, wondering if it mattered, if it was worthwhile. And then I had to remind myself that I'm learning in public, and that's the point. And so that became my standard, not delivering something that was perfect, but something where I showed up week after week, showing up honestly, even if I wasn't sure if I was doing it right, and actually kind of rejecting the idea that there was a version that was strictly right, that it was more important to just come in and do the work. And somewhere in all that repetition, record, edit, doubt, repeat, I realized that this has never been just a project. It actually was something I needed to practice, and it has been and continues to be a weekly audit of my own integrity, a way for me to check whether what I was saying matched who I was becoming, and if who I was becoming was truly who I wanted to end up as. And I think that that is one of the strange things about making something when you're sort of squirreled away in your own house. You start it because you want to talk to the world, but you end up hearing yourself more clearly than you ever have before. Now, somewhere after episode 20 or 30, I really started to notice a bit of a pattern, that I wasn't talking specifically about emotions anymore. I thought I was using much of the same language. I was talking about things like fear and empathy and anger and trust. But when I listened back, what I was actually talking about were the systems, how fear travels through an organization like a current, and how empathy gets filtered through hierarchy, how anger can become policy, and how trust, once it's broken, gets buried under layers and layers of paperwork and process and administration. And I realized that what I was most interested in wasn't the emotions exclusively. It was actually understanding the logic underneath it. Why do we feel threatened by some people and not others? What systems shape those feelings? Why are we impatient to opinions that aren't our own? What stories are running in the background that make us think our reactions are personal when they're actually structural? And at a certain point, it didn't make sense to dedicate entire episodes to explaining what sadness or frustration was. I just wanted to unpack how those emotions were connected to our reasoning, to our information sources, our biases, and our own sense-making systems. And that's because emotions don't happen in isolation. They are data. They are signals that are happening inside a much larger information network, a human network, a social network that depends on our ability to think clearly, interpret wisely, and act responsibly. And so that's what emotional organization slowly evolved into. It became a study of how thinking and feeling shape each other. And the more I looked, the clearer it became that our collective ability to think for ourselves, truly thinking, is eroding. People are overwhelmed. The pace of information is faster than the pace of reflection. We're encouraged to react and not to reason, to repost and not to research, to align but not to inquire. And it's not because people are dumb. It's because they're tired. Critical thinking takes energy. It takes curiosity, humility, and those are all things that are in short supply when we are stretched thin. But without it, we start to lose coherence and we start to speak in borrowed language. And truthfully, I see a lot of that everywhere I look. I see it on the social media channels. I see it in the writing that I receive in my emails through my clients. And I see it in the language that's being used by friends and colleagues, both in person and online. Our language is borrowed, and I think that that's because we haven't taken the time to actually analyze for ourselves. And so in that way, we are outsourcing our sense-making to the loudest voice in the room. We are allowing ourselves to become parrots, speaking back truths that we don't understand, truths that we can't argue for or against. And I think that's why I started to feel so restless in my own show. It was because I didn't want to keep describing emotional weather. I wanted to understand the climate, the systems that make the weather predictable in the first place. And yes, I love metaphors. How we collect and analyze the data of our lives is important, as is how we separate the signal from the noise. How we think well enough to participate effectively in society, and that requires things like building trust, solving problems, and not losing ourselves in the mess of misinformation and emotional fatigue. And that's become my real interest. Not so much what we feel, but how we think about what we feel. Not how to manage emotion, but how to reason our way through it. And that's when I knew that emotional organization had done its job. It had helped me feel. But now I want to learn how to think. And so that was the turning point, the realization that this podcast wasn't the end game. It was an apprenticeship. When I look back over my old notes, I could see this much more clearly. Everything that I'd been drawn to has always been around the systems, the governance, the behavior patterns, and they all are asking the same thing. And it's all around depth, not more data, not another framework, just deeper thought of what's actually already available. And I started seeing the world differently after that. I'd catch myself scrolling through the news and realizing that half the arguments people were having online weren't about values at all. They were just about the noise and the confusion. People just didn't know how to think their way through complexity anymore. And I'm not really judging that because I get it. I do it. It's exhausting to care about everything and still feel like you understand nothing. And I feel like that. But at some point, I thought, if I'm feeling this overwhelmed and I do this kind of work for a living, what does that mean for everyone else? And that's when the good think started forming in my mind, not as a rebrand so much as a next step, as a natural evolution. Because what I really wanted to explore wasn't just how we feel, it was how we reason, how we stay curious, how we keep our thinking clean in a world that feels really loud and messy. Now, for me, critical thinking isn't just an academic exercise. It really is a survival skill. It's what helps me decide where to spend my time, who to trust, what to build, and when to walk away. It's what keeps me from mistaking noise for meaning. And it's what I want to get better at, out loud, in real time, with whoever's listening. And that's what the good think will eventually be about. Not me telling you what to think, but us practicing how to think together. Through the things that matter, through the things that scare us, and through the things that deserve more than just a hot take or a soundbite. But before I could evolve this thing, I had to learn one more lesson, and that was that who I am off mic matters just as much as who I am on it. And that's because the person recording emotional organization isn't separate from the person that's renovating a house, or walking the dogs, or drinking coffee with her hubby in the morning. It's all me. And somewhere along the way, I realized that I'd built a podcast about emotional honesty without giving myself the same permission to just be human. And so here's who I actually am. I am a person who talks to her dogs like they're children. I'm a person who gets absurdly proud after painting a room well, and equally annoyed when I drip on the trim or make a mess on the floor. I'm the kind of person who will happily spend hours watching her husband work, in part because he's hot, but also because there's just something really satisfying about watching a man work his tools. I like the rhythm, the patience, the victories, and I like just being with him. I love conversations that move very quickly into real feelings. I hate small chalk. I also hate small chalk. Actually, I have a chalkboard and I hate the tiny little pieces, so that's fair as well. I hate small chalk and I hate small talk. I don't want to talk about the weather with you. I want to talk about what you're most proud of in your life, what you still hope to experience, about what your worries are and your fears, and also what you get giggly and silly about. I love language and I like the way that words work. I love how words have different meaning for people. I love that words sound different depending on how you say them. I love that ideas don't have tidy conclusions. I love that I disagree with myself and that I'm contrary. And that, yes, I have a mouth that would make any HR person nervous. I think in systems, I dream in metaphors, and I swear when the hammer slips. That is the real version of me, and that's who's going to be showing up for the good think. Now, if emotional organization was me learning how to feel, then this transition and the good think that follows is me learning how to do that thinking. And not in the academic kind of thinking that I'm used to, but in the kind that happens when you're honest enough to question yourself. The kind that demands you take a beat before reacting, and the kind that remembers that people, all people, are more than their opinions and worth discovering. And so in this next chapter, I'm not focusing on being right. I am focusing on being real, on staying curious through discomfort, and on exploring ideas from all angles. Because I think the world's full of good people who've just been drowned in data, smothered by clickbait, accosted by agenda-driven news, and who have ultimately forgotten how to slow down long enough to think for themselves. And I want to make space for that. So this is me closing the first chapter, a year of trial runs, of recording in paint-stained clothes, and truly learning out loud. A year that taught me that clarity doesn't come from planning, because Lord knows I have done so much of that, but it actually comes from practice, from showing up week after week to do the same thing, to get better at it, and to think about what's good and what can be improved. And so now I'm inviting you to tune in next week for the official pre-launch episode of The Good Think. Now I'm dragging this out just a little bit, and that's because I'm waiting for my music, you guys. I've got new audio coming, and so when I do publish this very first episode of the new season, I want to make sure that you get all the goods. You get the graphics, you get the music, and you get the updated version. So next week, we're going to be talking about what this new version is really all about, how it's structured, what kind of conversations we'll be having, how you can be part of it. And it's not just a rebrand, it is a new way of thinking together. I'm Denaige McDonnell, and this has been Emotional Organization. Thank you for being part of this first chapter and for staying curious enough to keep exploring what matters. If you liked this episode, share it with someone who's trying to find their own version of clarity. And if you've been here since the beginning, thank you for growing with me. You can find show notes and related writing over on my website, eihq.ca. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Denaige McDonnell for the day-to-day reflections, behind-the-scenes work, and the occasional soap-making, crafting adventure. I look forward to seeing you next week, and until then, keep those emotions working for you.